Welcome to Frequency. I'm Chuck Ghost.
And I'm Jenny Field.
And Frequency is your go-to for real talk about comms, culture, and employee experience, beyond the buzzwords and straight to what matters. Jenny, before we get into our news items of the week, there's three big things that I want to share here at the beginning. One, maybe big is the wrong word. Maybe important is a better word. First,
you built it up now, so it's got to be big.
Well, you know what? The first one is a big one, so we'll leave it as big.
Okay.
Thank you to everyone who has given us feedback about our very first episode, shared this on LinkedIn, all of those things. We really do appreciate the feedback and the support as we begin on this journey, and we hope you continue along the way with all of us. The second item, Jenny, is another big piece of news. We're going to stick with big here. You announced that you are bringing Comms Reboot to North America. And notice I said North America, not the US. You're bringing this to Toronto.
I am.
Who at one point in time were America's neighbors to the north, but apparently now we're supposed to not like each other or something. I don't know what's going on. But Jenny, I'm excited for you to bring it to North America. Tell everyone a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So Comms Reboot is the communications unconference. So it's a chance for people to get together to set the agenda for the whole day based on the challenges and issues people really want to talk about. And I'm bringing it to Toronto in partnership with Contact Monkey, who are helping make this all happen. It's their first in-person event, which is really cool. And we're hoping to get about 50, 60 people together to talk about all the things, employee experience, internal comms, leadership, culture, all of that stuff. And I'm really excited. So I'm coming over. The event's on the 25th of June. And it's an all-day event. So fingers crossed, we will see lots of people there.
And hopefully by then, the US and Canada, we can actually be friends again, and all of this mess will
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
The last thing is not as big, but I think just more conversational for you, Jenny. There's a rumor out there, and you know how rumors work, and this is actually even a rumor in our house, Jenny.
Okay.
That the Spice Girls are getting back together and going on tour. This is a big topic in our house recently. Because my wife, Kristen, who we all love and adore, basically believes you are a Spice Girl, Jenny. And with this rumor of a new tour and you coming across for Comms Reboot, you know, I was thinking this is important for everyone to know the history, because there were 5 Spice Girls, and I'm going to rattle these off. And Jenny, you can see I'm making eye contact. I'm not reading notes here.
No.
We had Scary Spice, Sporty Spice, Baby Spice, Ginger Spice, and Posh Spice.
Correct.
What would your Spice Girl name be, Jenny?
Oh my God. Well, that's hard because I grew up with the Spice Girls, so I kind of adopted their names, which was Posh, really. I don't know why. What would my Spice Girl name be? Fun Spice.
Fun Spice. We went with something a little more generic, like Calm Spice, but I will say I like Fun Spice. Maybe Fun Spice.
So with all my friends, I'll always say I'm fun, and my best friend always says I'm fun but not funny. But we'll leave that joke to one side. So I'm always fun. Like I always want to do stuff, embrace life. You know, do whatever, do anything. It's there to be lived. So, what would yours be?
That is a great question, Jenny. I've actually given this quite a bit of thought. I think I'm going to go with Grudge Spice.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Grudge Spice.
Okay.
So with that, let's get into the items we want to talk about this week, Jenny.
I love it. I've got so many more questions. Great. So I have been reading a few articles this week, which have really got me thinking about the role of senior communication professionals. It's got me thinking about the language we use to describe challenges in organizations, and also really trying to get underneath engagement stuff and engagement scores. So I am not a big fan of engagement scores. I feel like if your engagement score is 86%, I don't really know what that means. I don't know how you feel about them, but I always feel like I don't know what that's really measuring in terms of business outcome. So engagement scores for me are always a bit questionable. But there has been a latest report from McLean and Company, who have published some new research on shifts shaping the workplace. And I was having a look at that data about what was it they were saying was the kind of biggest issue impacting engagement. And there wasn't one big thing, but there were a few little things. And there are 4 things that they talked about. One was work-life balance for managers. So this is specifically people managers having quite a hard time. The second one is leadership competency gaps. So saying that really at early career levels, this is quite challenging. So building skills around empathy, emotional intelligence, all the things I often talk about to be credible as a leader. The third thing is career advancement. So people are saying they don't really have much opportunity to move forward. And then the fourth one is like just general total compensation. So people saying that that's a challenge with the cost of living, which I think is impacting everybody. So it's not particularly new. And I think that's probably part of the conversation today is this engagement challenge that's been around for such a long time. I just don't see that it ever really shifts. And that's why I have this issue with this number that I don't really think means anything without any context. But these 4 challenges for me don't feel particularly new. It feels like this is always the challenge. So then I think about what's the point in measuring engagement if it just continues to be an issue? Like, what are we really trying to achieve? So that was the first thing that was on my mind this week.
So looking at those 4 things, Jenny, yeah, the compensation part, not a surprise. I don't think there's probably ever been a point in time in history where people are like, you know what, I don't need any more money, I'm good. Perhaps there's some financial maturity out there from people who are just happy with what they have. So yeah, the fact that people are complaining about compensation, that's probably the last thing that leaders want to hear employees complaining about. But I do think it's worth focusing on the managers in this, not the leaders, not the C-suite, not the frontline employees. They each should get their own focus in a separate conversation. But with managers, when you see some of the data, like they're 2 times more likely to experience stress. I was surprised by the number of basically 6 out of 10 reported having any kind of work-life balance. You had mentioned you struggled with engagement results and engagement numbers. I struggle at times with work-life balance or people talking about it because it's always going to be a challenge when one side wants more than you have to give. So are you ever truly in balance, or are you always just balancing those 2 things? To me, that comes back on the manager. That comes back on the employee in setting boundaries. And I know that's easier said than done. This isn't to point fingers at managers, but it's up to you to set those boundaries. Work will always take more than you can give. Life will always take more than you can give. So it's up to you to set those boundaries. Managers are at this difficult point where you're in the middle, which means you're hearing from leaders. You're also hearing from your employees. You're expected to deliver outcomes. You have no one looking out for you. You have no air cover for you. So I think, again, as looking at this, if you're listening as a comms person or you're listening to this as an HR person, always think about like, what else can we do for the managers out there?
Yeah, I think you're right. When you say it's on the employee to make that decision, and you said like it's kind of easy to say, sometimes harder to do. I remember when I was global head of communications, and I would get the train at 6:15, and I'd work on the train, and I'd get to the office about 7:30, and then I wouldn't be getting home till about 7. And it was getting to the point where I wasn't able to have the balance. So I wasn't able to get to the gym, which I was partly doing like, oh no, I've missed my train. I can't get to the gym. But I do remember having the conversation with my boss to say, look, everything in our organization at that time was going well. There was no crisis. There was no massive change. So I was like, I'm going to leave at 4 because I'm still contactable away from the office, but it means I get home at a good time and it means I can go to the gym and do stuff. And taking that first step is an example I always give because it took quite a bit of courage to do that in an office where people still were because you kind of conform. But once I did it once or twice, actually it was fine and it just became quite normal. So I think it's once you make the first step, which is the hardest, it then becomes a lot easier. But you're right about this that sort of soft middle or messy middle or whatever we want to call that manager bit, because they are really stuck like that. It's such a hard job because you're also having to communicate stuff sometimes that you don't really agree with, or you don't know why it's happening, or you haven't been told. In nearly all the work I do with communication teams, that line manager communication piece just isn't there in the strategy. Like, how are we talking to managers? How are we talking to managers? It comes up all the time. So yeah, it's not really a surprise, but hopefully, like you said, if people are listening in HR internal comms, the managers piece is going to start to kind of catch up a bit.
I want to jump in just with one other quick thing here too.
Yeah.
The other interesting element was around proficiency, which we touched on a little bit in our first episode around the skills people have. And this pointed out that first-time leaders just don't have those skills. I think it was like 1 in 10 or 10% have those skills. So I think one of the big winners here in this conversation is anyone in the learning and development space, any of the vendors out there who have training availability, who can coach up managers, give them the skills that they need, whether it's a playbook or scenarios or whatever it is. I think that takes it beyond just performance reviews and spreadsheets that so often managers are evaluated by. It's things like coaching and resiliency and empathy training. That I think is an opportunity now for us to dig in more.
Yeah, and I think we have to do it even more in a world where people that used to be office-based all the time are now hybrid or remote. So you're not having those relationships and being able to learn as you go. There's also actually a really good book about leadership credibility, which is on my shelf.
Oh, interesting.
I know. So if anybody wants to get a copy of Nobody Believes You and how to be a leader people will follow, we'll pop a link in the show notes for you to have a look at that.
Let's take the time to talk about that then. What about that book? Let's say you are a first-time leader. You are a first-time manager. Jenni, you wrote the book. What can they learn? What are some of those things?
So the thing about being a first-time leader is you're probably always going to get it wrong, which isn't particularly helpful. Like, I remember when I first managed people, that wasn't a good experience probably for them, but you have to learn, right? You have to be given the chance to do it. But the book covers the 8 practices of being a credible leader. So being someone people follow. And it includes the practical stuff you need to do to demonstrate trust, to have integrity, to have empathy, to be supportive. And we talk about these very big words, but we don't really talk about what that means. So just as an example, if we talk about being vulnerable, we want to be vulnerable to create connection. To create connection, we have to be personal, but not intimate. So I always say to people, use your out of office and tell people where you are. Like, if you're on holiday with your family, say, I'm here with my family, or I'm at a conference, or I'm having a day off to just relax. Like, use that as a tool to share a bit more that brings that personal side enough to establish connection. And it has to be the outcome. So there's lots of stuff that I do talk about in it, but I think it's getting really practical with some of it and taking the time to learn. I think that's the biggest thing, is if you're going into a leadership role or a management role, it is a skill. It's like communication, HR, finance, all of the different functions in any organization require a skill, and we have to take the time to learn. Get off my soapbox now about that one. Right. The second thing I want to talk about is a post on LinkedIn that was shared, I think, last week, maybe the week before. And I commented on this and I sent it to you and I said, I think I had to comment on this because I couldn't help it. And you went, add it to the list. And so here we are. So there was a post on LinkedIn where somebody had said, I recently heard about a company that decided not to backfill their departing chief communications officer, believing they could manage just fine and with the remaining leaders in the function. Unfortunately, this isn't an isolated incident, and it overlooks the fundamental value and strategic advantage provided by a talented CCO. And then they went on to explain why eliminating that CCO role was such a mistake. And there were loads of comments in huge agreement with this, which I don't disagree with that. But my comment was, I'm curious to know what happened to the organisation you mentioned. What was the impact for them and the leadership team after the role wasn't replaced? As I said, I don't disagree, but I'd love to hear what the actual impact was and if the belief that it's such a fundamental role was matched by the impact people felt. Because for me, this just comes back to the conversation we had a bit in the last episode about we just talk to ourselves. So as communication professionals or HR professionals, we might talk about the importance of these roles, but if that value isn't seen by anybody else, then we're just talking into a what are we talking into? An echo chamber, I suppose. We're just talking to ourselves. Like, and that was my question. So I don't know. What do you think? I just thought I could get on board with this and be like, yes, it's actually outrageous that this has happened, if it's even true. But it's happened. And if there's no impact, and if that organization is saying, actually, we're fine, we've been able to communicate effectively, it hasn't made any difference. We've maybe recruited somebody more junior who's helping us with content and newsletters and some of our channels. But actually, that's all we need. We don't need someone at that senior level for this organization or this culture or whatever it is. And that I just sort of thought I'd rather see that side of it, not just everyone jumping on and saying how outrageous it is.
Yeah, I didn't take it as any sort of personal attack on the validity of communications as a critical function. I think, we don't know a lot of the answers. Was this person not very good
Yes.
at their job? Is the organization downsizing and somebody had to go? I mean, I've seen organizations also eliminate CHR roles when they've shrunk. And that's not an indictment of HR in any way, shape, or form. I think it's more that we feel like we're on the defense of anyone coming after us. It's because they don't care about us. I think the more interesting part of this is talking about how, again, we don't know the exact story. We just know what was shared on LinkedIn of the responsibilities being cast about the leadership. I think that's the more interesting topic, because as you mentioned on the last episode, comms means different things inside different organizations. So we actually really don't know what value this person or this role brought to the organization. It might not have been the right time for them to have a CCO. Now, the danger is if that organization doesn't value communications. That's a bigger indictment on the organization, not so much the profession itself.
And just making me think about my career and where I've had different roles setting up different functions. And when I was a communications director, I would say after about 6 months, it became quite clear that they probably didn't want a communications director. I think they liked the idea of one. And then I roll in. And actually, we ended up replacing that role with a more junior role because of where they were in the organization's bigger kind of ecosystem. And they just didn't want that level of communication advice. They wanted someone just to do what they wanted them to do. And I know there'll be people that might be listening to this going, but that's not what comms is for. We're a strategic partner. It should be that. But sometimes it is about just doing the content and getting messages out and getting things back in and being part of that glue between that. And sometimes that is where you start, and that's okay. And that is where a lot of people enjoy being. It's where I spent a lot of my early career, was doing that. It doesn't always have to be that sort of big strategic role. And I think that sometimes we get stuck in thinking everyone that works in a communications role, in whatever discipline that might be, needs to be up at a really senior level, which is madness, right? Because then nothing would get done, and not everybody wants to do that anyway.
I think of it as when you hear news of, let's say, a CCO role being eliminated, to me it feels like one of those hand grenade decisions where they pulled the pin and they've thrown it. We won't really know the impact for a long time. Does it erode trust? Is the organization misaligned now? Are people feeling more siloed or segregated from other parts of the business? We won't really know for a while. No. I'm sure that person may or may not be missed from the organization. We don't know, but let's say they are. Obviously, that creates some distrust in the organization or people beginning to look around. But it's one of those top-level decisions that to feel that impact might actually take a little while for the organization to recognize, was that the right or wrong decision?
And the person didn't answer my comment, so I don't know. Like you said, we don't know anymore. But I don't enjoy the conversations where we don't know enough context, I suppose, to then be able to comment on it. But I also think there has to be a business impact. There has to be an organizational impact. And like you said, you won't know that for some time to know whether or not it's made a difference.
Can we talk quickly about the LinkedIn post? Because I will acknowledge you and I live on LinkedIn probably way more than most people do or care to. However, if you do post something like this, it is called social media. If someone comes back and leaves a comment with a question, engage. Like we're all out there learning. Hopefully you're not just broadcasting and stirring things up and then leaving it. If people post things like this and someone asks
Yeah.
a question, like, you have responsibility to come back and provide dialogue. So I'll get off my soapbox now on that.
Do you think we feel that because we grew up with social media coming in, and there was always this talk about the social element to it? And I do wonder whether, as its time has gone on, people use it more as like a broadcast channel rather than the social element, which is
Yeah, it's just a mistake. It's a great way to keep the conversation going or provide depth or context. And if you ignore that, then that's not the social part of it. So again, off my soapbox.
I really hope people are watching the video so they can just see your face. Right. The last article that I wanted to talk about was one that was in the Harvard Business Review. And this I thought was really interesting because at the start of this year, there's been a bit of talk about the amount of change in organizations, and change fatigue being one of the big things that came out of Gallagher's State of the Sector research. It's talked about a lot as one of our challenges. This article talked about whether it's strategy fatigue or change fatigue. And so I'm going to read a bit from this, which defines the difference between the two. So the report is based on a survey, first of all, that showed that 85% of senior leaders have observed an explosive increase in transformation projects over the past 5 years, right? 85%. I think we can all understand that. But it then goes on to say strategy fatigue is not the same as change fatigue. Change fatigue is triggered by frequent alterations to workplace processes. It results from the sheer volume of changes in how people work. Strategy fatigue, in contrast, is caused by frequent, and a word I can't say, shifts, capricious shifts? I don't know what that means. Capricious shifts in an organization's strategic direction when leaders continually flip-flop on priorities, employees struggle to understand the company's purpose and objectives. And I wanted to talk about this because when I read this, I thought, oh, it's not change fatigue, it's strategy fatigue, because I don't think people are having frequent alterations to workplace processes. I think they are having strategy fatigue, which is this frequent and many shifts in strategic direction. And that's something I see with clients where I'm saying, to do your communication strategy, we need to look at the organization strategy. And they always say, well, we're not too sure what that is at the moment, or it's changing, or we're doing a review like that. That's, I would say, 95% of the conversations I'm having. So for me, this was a bit of a light bulb moment of, is it change fatigue or is it strategy fatigue? And I'm in the strategy fatigue camp, I think. No, I am.
Yep. I think that's a good statement of privilege on your part, Jenny, saying this is strategy fatigue, because I'm going to look at this a little bit differently. I think for a lot of frontline employees, it is absolutely, again, I'm not a big fan of the word fatigue, but we'll stick with it, of change fatigue. Because to me, that's like, how do I do my job today? I just want to do my job.
Do you really think people, well, you said frontline people.
Frontline,
so do you
I'm thinking
mean
frontline
people
employees.
Okay.
Like they just like, that's the, like, how am I doing my job today? And if every week there's like leadership or management is coming and saying, nope, you got to do it this way. Nope, now we're changing it this way. Nope. I think there's an element of that at the frontline levels of organizations, there's a little bit of exhaustion from that. I think the strategy fatigue or exhaustion is as you go into manager roles and leadership roles where their jobs are basically the same. It's just more the answer like, why am I doing this? That's sort of the strategy conversation.
See, I don't bring. Sorry.
And I think it's just everyone's exhausted everywhere. I saw this TikTok from a comedian, Neil Brennan, who's like, the 5 most annoying words in the English language are, have you seen the documentary? Because his point was that we used to all be able to just enjoy things. And then there's always a documentary about something that's like, oh, now I can't enjoy that anymore. And so I think there's so much information out there, and I'm not talking the overload stuff. This is just, there's a lot of information out there. And I just think people are exhausted. When inside ecology, we have industry calls where we get groups of industry communicators together. And on the manufacturing one, we were talking about the tariffs here in the US and the impact that has. And you could just see the wave of exhaustion come over them, just having to even think about this impact this is having on their business. So I wish we could get back to just letting people do the job. Just let them do their job. They're the ones that know it best. And so I think the change versus strategy elements might just be the layers of the organization.
I disagree because it's our first one of these. This is fun. Because I always feel that when you're communicating with employees on the front line, and if I think about my experience having to communicate with 8,000 people serving food and drinks in train stations and airports and things like that, does their job fundamentally change when things change at a head office or corporate level? So when we do restructures and things like that, how much does that really impact the role of that person who is serving customers? And I don't know that their role does change. I don't know that their processes and things are changing that much, when I think the fatigue is coming from the people that are in the office who have got this strategy fatigue. But I feel like we're going to have to do a poll on LinkedIn where we live, and ask people on the back of this episode, like, do you feel like you've got change fatigue or strategy fatigue, and kind of explain the differences? Because I think
I don't want to do that on LinkedIn.
Well, I'm going to do that. So you don't have to, but I'm going to ask when we publish this episode, because I think it's a conversation to consider the language we use, like to talk about the fact that if we take the frontline workers off the table, right? So we come into the people that are working in comms, HR, finance, operations, they will all say, from what we've heard, that they've got change fatigue. And then everything becomes about being about change, and that stupid phrase that change is the only constant, which I hate. And then change, it all becomes about that. Whereas actually, is it, or is it strategy? I do think it is strategy. I think it is.
So you can then be strategy spice and I will be change spice.
Okay. I'm here for that. I am going to ask the question because I'm genuinely interested in what people think. And I
know what they're going to say. I know what
are they going to say?
Well, there's the audience on LinkedIn is skewed. It's not going to have the frontline audience on there.
I know. But having done quite a lot of research with deskless workers, I would call them, or frontline workers, they haven't ever, I mean, we've never done a change specific research report, but they've never talked about the fact that things change so much. If anything, it's very much the same in terms of the job that they're doing. So things don't change very much, which makes it quite monotonous in some places, which can make it quite boring for some people, but other people love that sort of routine. So
this is dating it, but this is the story that came to mind. This was back when Apple Pay first launched. And I remember I was at a Panera and I was like, oh my God, this is cool. This is the first time I get to use it. And so I go to try to use it and it doesn't work. And I asked the cashier what it was. And she was like, we have no idea. They just rolled this out. We have no idea how this thing even works or what it does. Now that's dating the process. Everybody knows that Apple Pay is here. But my point is, there's always going to be an Apple Pay. There's always something that companies are the strategy and how they're collecting money and how they're rolling things out. But that person's job changed that day. And in the company, this is not an indictment of Panera. They
nice.
They didn't inform the employees. Yeah. They didn't know what was going on. Her job as a cashier changed. There was and nobody told them. So then you could see the frustration on our part. Yeah. So I think it's these little things. I don't think it's like, oh, now you're completely, let's say if we stick with this cashier thing, you're completely checking out people differently. But it's little things like, oh, you used to log in this way. Now you log in this way. Oh, you used to record your hours this way. Now you're doing it this way.
Okay.
So all of those changes, I think, add up to them, where a lot of those frontline employees, not that they don't care about the company and they don't care about strategy, they are there to do a job. They are there to do whatever that job is, and they want to do that job. So let them do the job.
And do you think that those changes around, you need to log in here, you need to do this, are all linked to the digital change and transformation that organizations are trying to do that takes a long time and sometimes isn't always done the best way? So you end up with lots of different systems and lots of different ways to log in. Do you think that's goes kind of a link to that in terms of where
I think digital is a
organizations are
part of
going?
it, but I think it's just a part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. We had quite the debate there. I quite enjoyed that. Thank you. I don't have anything
And
else on my
I
list
look
of
forward to your
articles
skewed
today.
LinkedIn results. So
So that's fine because the reason I want to do it, just to go back to this, is the change fatigue came up in the survey, the Gallagher State of the Sector. So it's a similar audience to that. And that's what I want to kind of test is actually, if you're talking to communication and HR professionals, which is the main audience I have, what do they say? Do they say, oh, actually, now you've explained it, I think it's this? Or are we sticking with change? I think that's my hypothesis, really, rather than doing a whole other piece of research. But, we might get there one day. So they were all the articles I had read this week that I wanted to touch on. Did you have anything you wanted to add before we wrap up the
we
episode
end
today?
every episode with things we are freaking out about, playing off of our frequency name. If you're listening to this we launch these on Mondays. So if you're listening to us on Monday or Tuesday, I will be in Nashville, Tennessee, attending an event called Remarkable You, put on by Jon Acuff, who's one of my favorite authors out there. I would like to say I can call Jon a friend. I mean, we text from time to time, but it's really cool to see your friends create their own experiences out there. So Jenni, whether it's you with Comms Reboot, Jon Acuff with Remarkable You, it's going to be special because I get to be there with Ashley Hickson, who is my ecology mentee. We use Jon Acuff's book soundtracks as the basis for our mentorship. So we wanted to do this event together. And it's just really cool to see Jon Acuff take this next step. So if you're listening to this on Monday or Tuesday, maybe you're in Nashville as well, but I will be there for the Remarkable You event.
I'm so jealous about this because I have, ever since you mentioned soundtracks, I have fallen in love with Jon's work and I have followed him a lot. And I've read his other book, All It Takes Is a Goal, which I really liked as well. And if I could get to Nashville next week, then I would. But sadly, I can't. But please say hello from me. He doesn't know me, but I feel like in time he will.
You know what? I'll say anyway. Actually, he does. You know what? He does know of you, though, because right when he announced the event, I think I might have shared it with you before I was supposed to, maybe. Yeah. And I was like, oh, sorry, I mentioned this to my friend. I want to get her to come across to do it because he was actually one of the first people to know about frequency.
Yes.
Because of this being a new thing for us and his message around soundtracks and being Remarkable You, all of that, I wanted him to know that this is one of the journeys that we were on.
It's very cool. It's very, very cool. I will expect a full update when we chat next week on how it's gone. What am I freaking out about this week? I don't feel like I'm freaking out about much this week, other than the fact that I fell over doing my run yesterday, and now I've got an injured ankle, and that means I can't do the training and stuff I wanted to do in the next kind of few weeks. And whilst it's not kind of work related, that for me is just quite annoying. Like I'm a big outdoors person. Like I like going for walks and running and training and stuff, and it's just annoyed me that I fell over.
Per the Instagram story that I saw about the injury, I fully expected to hear like an amputation event or something.
It was very dramatic, wasn't
because
it?
of how dramatic that Instagram story was. So yeah, I'm glad to hear you're able to keep your ankle.
My
it is
ankle
a mild
is fine.
sprain. And you know what?
Yes.
And you are here to deliver on frequency. So thanks for fighting through the injury.
I am. I was downstairs earlier with it up and iced, ready to then be stood up to be able to do this. So,
you're a trooper, Jenni. You're a trooper.
Such a hero. Oh no, we don't like hero. Someone said that the other day. I hate it when people use hero for comms people.
That was me.
Was that you? Me. It was like someone did talk about that. I thought it was you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We'll save that for
another topic.
Time.
We will indeed. All that's left for me to say is just thank you for joining us this week. Everything we've talked about, all the articles I've referenced, they're going to be in the show notes, so make sure you check those out. As always, please subscribe, leave a review. It really means a lot to both of us. And if you think somebody would like to listen, please pass this along and share it with your friends as well. Also, a shout out to Poet Ali for the soundtrack. Thank you very much. And we will be back next week with more news, insights, opinions, probably disagreements, some fun, some strategy, some change, but everything comms, leadership, and in workplaces today. So keep tuning in and keep turning up.